lesson is on preparing for and taking tests. We're going to start out with a video by a college counselor, and the video is only like 2 minutes, which I think we need to spend a little more than 2 minutes on an important topic like test anxiety and taking and preparing for tests. So after the video, I'm going to make a few comments as well.
I'm Chris Thomas, the Assistant Director of the Center for Counseling and Student Development here at Coppin State University. I have for you today the CCSD's top 10 tips to reduce test anxiety. So the best way to prepare for test anxiety, not preparing for test anxiety, hello. I want to prepare to be anxious. That's tip number 1. So the best way to avoid test anxiety is to prepare. Because if you don't know, you just don't know. Because some people, I think, they say they have test anxiety and they just didn't prepare, that's all. If you don't study, you should be nervous. You just don't know it. That's normal to be nervous. Tip number 2, make sure you take all that material that you're studying and space it out into nice little nuggets. Trying to cram everything at the same time the night before usually doesn't work out too well. Tip number 3, make sure you get a good night's rest so you can be awake and ready to go. Tip number 4, make sure you show up to class early so you can get comfortable, attend to those last minute details, and be ready for the exam ahead. Tip number 5, relax. Take a few deep breaths and get back to work. Tip number 6, write down all those formulas, facts, keywords, mnemonic devices that are kind of running around in your mind. Write them all down in the margins or on the back of your test paper so they'll be ready when you need them. Tip number 7, complete those easy questions first. That'll give you the momentum and confidence to move through the harder questions. Tip number 8, take your own test. Forget about other people, what they're doing or not doing. Focus on your test. Take your test. Tip number 9, focus on the actual question in front of you without getting too distracted as your mind may wander off into other directions. Tip number 10, studying is half the battle. If you're still experiencing test anxiety after following the strategies that we talked about, you might want to set an appointment with the school counselor. I guess that's me.
Of course, at our college, it's not him. We have our own counselor, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But let me take a little time now for me to kind of reiterate the things he said and add a few points that I'd like to make. Tip number 1, I loved when he said prepare, because if you don't know, you just don't know. And he even said, and you deserve to be nervous. You should be nervous if you're not prepared. But what can you do to be prepared? And this is the test prep part. Attend class, obviously. Keep up with your homework. Make the most of your homework. Don't just do it, but learn from it. If you don't understand it, ask questions until you really do understand it. Finish your homework in time to do a pretest or two. Don't be finishing your homework up the night before or while you're sitting in the hall before the test. Finish your homework a few days beforehand, maybe so that you can do a pretest or two. At the end of the chapter in the textbook, there are unit reviews or chapter reviews, and there are chapter tests. That's one place to get a pretest. Some faculty hand them out. If you're in an ALEKS class, some faculty create one in ALEKS that you can take. Some faculty have that attached to points, like you need to take it and you get points, it's part of your grade. Others, it's optional, it's up to you. It's always a good idea to take a test before you take the test so that you know what you know and know what you don't know. If you are in an online ALEKS class this semester with Professor Goff or myself, you will want to use the review section in ALEKS. Our tests are using the knowledge checks, and it's not a set standard set questions. Everybody's going to be answering different questions based on what ALEKS thinks you need to be working on. So if you don't know how to use the review section, if you go into Blackboard, in the resources section under ALEKS, it will give you a video of how to use the review section in ALEKS. If none of those things work for you, the Math Prep and Learning Lab has unit reviews available. They're on Blackboard also on the MPLL Blackboard site. So take the pretest as if it's a test. Don't use your notes. Replicate the environment as much as possible. Some people actually come into school and to sit at a desk and take the pretest. Before taking it, write out your memory dump. He talked about this when he talked about writing down the things you know. So on the side, or in the margins, or in the back of your test, write down a memory dump, which I'll talk about again later, I think. But it's all those things that you want to make sure you remember. Don't use helps. Don't use notes, calculator. Don't use anything you're not going to be able to use in the classroom when you take your test. Set a time limit so that you have the same sort of pressure that you have in the classroom. Always show your work. So if there's not room on the pretest, just like if there's not room on the test, take a piece of scratch paper, write down the problem number, the problem, and then all the steps you took to solve that problem. When you're totally finished, check your answers. Look at your work. Analyze what you were thinking. So if you didn't get the same answer as the answer sheet said, figure out what you were thinking and then compare your process to an example from the text or ALEKS. If you still don't understand where you went wrong, ask your instructor or a tutor. The point of a pretest is to then study the things that you need to keep working on. Tip number 2, space out your work. Don't cram. Your brain needs time to process and compress information. Cramming is not a good strategy for doing a good job on tests. Tip number 3, get a good night's sleep. Also, be sure to eat a decent meal before a test. But don't have a huge one just before a test. You don't want this to be you. Tip number 4, get there early. You don't want this to be you. You don't need the added stress of rushing into class last minute, sitting down and not being organized, not having your head together. Tip number 5, relax. Take a breath. Practice in advance and use relaxation techniques before the test so that you're ready to use them during the test. So one breathing technique is to slowly count to 4, breathing in, counting in 1, 2, 3, 4 while you breathe in slowly. And then as you hold for the count of 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, then breathe out. 1, 2, 3, 4. Then hold with exhaled to the count of 4 and repeat that 4 times. It's kind of hard to show you without showing you. That probably sounded really funny. If you're tensing up during a test, even just relaxing your shoulders and putting your hands down to your sides and shaking out your hands can relax you. Or lean back, close your eyes, relax, take a few deep breaths. The idea is to relax yourself so your brain isn't freaking out, so that your brain can be relaxed so it can do a good job for you. Tip number 6, write down the important stuff. This is that data dump or memory dump I was talking about a minute ago. So we said do it for the pretest so that you're ready to do it on the test. When the test is handed out, write down any things that you think you need to remember. So those might be cues for how you think about adding and subtracting fractions. It may be order of operations, write down PEMDAS. It may be just whatever it is that you need to remember. Have it in your brain when you walk in so that when you get your paper, you can write those things down. So while you're preparing for the test, you're going to make a list of those things so that when you go in to take the test, you can write them all down. If you write them on a card in advance and review them, then when you get into the test, you'll have them remembered to be able to write them all down. Remember, you're doing this from memory. It isn't a cheat sheet. You're not taking in a cheat sheet and copying things. You're doing the memory dump or data dump from memory. You might also want to write slow down on each page. I know a lot of students that really helps, gets them to slow down. And at the end of the test, on the last page, you might want to write, check your answers. So when you finish the test, you check your answers and go back and look at them. Tip number 7, do the easy stuff first. Before you start, look over all the questions, then go back and do the easy ones. Might as well get those out of the way. Give yourself a confidence boost. Make sure you answer them and don't skip them. Yet on this is if you're in the ALEKS Online where you're taking the knowledge check, you're not going to be able to look at questions in advance. You have to take them in the order they come. Tip number 8, take your test. I loved when he said this. Block out everyone else. Don't be looking at everybody else. Don't be looking around. Focus on your test. Somebody leaves early, just because they finish first doesn't mean they even answered all the questions. So often I see students, the first student leaves and students start freaking out and trying to work faster. And you can tell they're more nervous Well, just because he may not, or he or she may not have even answered any questions correctly. They may not have remembered anything. Just because they left first doesn't mean that everybody should be able to do it that fast. They may not have even finished the test. So don't let them psych you out. Tip number 9, one question at a time. It's okay to skip a question, move on to something easier, but only look at one question at a time. Don't get confused. In fact, some people will put paper over the questions they're not answering so that all they focus on is that one question. If you're taking a test in ALEKS, it gives you one question at a time, so it takes care of that for you. Tip number 9 and a quarter, because I have some things I want to say he didn't have on his list. Read the directions carefully. I hate it when students do great math, but they didn't answer the question, so the question is wrong. If you're not sure, ask for clarification. So if you're not sure what the directions mean, ask the instructor. They might say, sorry, I can't tell you that. You should know that. But it doesn't hurt to ask. Tip number 9.5. If you aren't sure, at least try. Don't leave a blank question. You can get no points for a no answer. Show your work. You might get some points for an attempt. You might know part of the problem. You might have some good logic that you get some points for. So don't just leave it blank. Tip number 9.75. Before you leave, check your answers. The key to this is don't change anything unless you know exactly why you're changing it. Don't just flip through answers and think, oh, that one doesn't look right. If you can't tell me exactly why you're changing it, then don't change it. Go with your first instinct. And finally, tip number 10, see the counselor. There are strategies a counselor can teach you to beat test anxiety. So if you do all these things and you still have anxiety that causes you problems on a test, see a counselor. And this is the number that GRCC counselors can be reached at. You can call and set up an appointment, or go on grcc.edu, put counseling in the search bar, and you can find the number there as well. So hopefully those 10 tips will help you beat test anxiety and be prepared for your first test.